I think this is going to work. I'm going to turn my voice down a little bit. And I would like to check levels on your mic. So what was something interesting you saw this morning?
I don't know if it was interesting, but I have an 18-month-old, and my brother-in-law was visiting, and he would get up and was like, Adam, and it was just really sweet to see him do that, to call for his uncle.
How well does he know your brother?
Pretty good.
Pretty well.
Yeah, but it's not
they've already spent time together.
He comes to visit. He spent the night. That happens very rarely. So he was just woke up and he's like, Adam, car, because he loves cars. He's like, check out my car. Nice.
Oh, that's fun.
It is. Yeah, it's my first kid, so
yeah,
it's all new for me, and my heart melted.
Totally. It doesn't really stop with the second kid.
Great.
if you're thinking about
just
more,
melt even more.
It just keeps melting. It really does. This is Interstates. I'm Alex Chambers. We're listening to Erin Aquino, and I did not actually bring her into the studio to talk about first versus second kids, although family living apart from each other does run underneath all of this. What I brought Erin in to talk about was people whose lives have been shaped, profoundly shaped, I would say, by national borders. I've been thinking about borders for a few months now. The last time we had our current president, he talked a lot about building a wall between Mexico and the U.S. There's less talk of a wall this time. It turns out, in the 21st century, a wall isn't the most effective way to stop people coming into your country. It's bureaucracy. Visas, passports, customs, resident status. You can stop a lot more people by changing rules than building a wall. And that's what Trump has done this time. One of the rules he changed, this was on his very first day in office, was about refugees. To explain, as you may know, I didn't, the president has a lot of control over how many refugees enter the United States. Every year, the president decides how many refugees the country will accept. In Obama's last year in office, about 85,000 refugees resettled here. In the last year of Trump's first term, it was about 12,000. Biden brought it up to 100,000, and then, as soon as Trump got back into office, he completely suspended the program, meaning 0 refugees would be admitted to the U.S. I've talked with a few people now about what's going on in the refugee resettlement world, and they've all pointed out something important about refugees coming to the U.S. They are the most vetted group of immigrants to come here. It can take years for them to get accepted. We'll get into more of the details about that soon, but just keep that in mind. There's an organization here in Bloomington that helps refugees resettle. I wanted to understand how Trump's suspension of refugee resettlement has affected the office here and the people they help. And to understand that, I thought it would be good to hear the story of how that office got started. And that is why Erin Aquino came to the studio a few weeks ago. She's the director of the Bloomington office of Exodus Refugee. Exodus has been around as an organization since 1981, but Erin got called in to start the Bloomington office at the beginning of 2022. When she took the job, she'd imagined having a few months to get things set up. But she ended up moving a lot faster than anyone expected. Which was good, because you can't meet with clients in a hotel room, and the post office was getting tired of all the car seats. So, after a quick break, Erin Aquino is going to tell us how to set up a refugee resettlement office when the refugees have already started arriving. And we'll talk about what's happened since January 20th. Stay with us. I want to hear the story of the Bloomington office, which I think listeners might not necessarily be like, what's this, the story of an office? Ooh. But I actually, from what I know of it, it's got some interesting twists and turns.
Yes.
And some mountains that had to be climbed for it to happen. So maybe you could start by just briefly telling me about how you got involved with Exodus in the first place. And then we can hear about sort of the development of the Bloomington office.
Yeah, great. So probably in any career, there's twists and turns. But I was in the Peace Corps, actually, and returned. I was in Senegal in West Africa. Spent 2 years there. It was great. Had a wonderful time. But also wanted to be back stateside with my family, but definitely still wanted to be working with international populations, and definitely wanted to be in a sphere with populations experiencing marginalization. So refugee work was a perfect sphere for that. And thankfully, Exodus took a chance on me in those early days. that was 10 years ago, over 10 years ago now. They hired me to work in their employment and education program and sort of worked my way up and managed a few different programs. This was all in the Indianapolis office. Bloomington office didn't exist at that time, obviously. And then I ended up leaving to get my master's in social work in New Mexico. And, still didn't know where I was going to end up. Not sure what I was going to do. Well, actually, I was sure. I had a plan. I was going to go get a clinical fellowship in a different part of the country. But things changed and wanted to be back in Indiana. And they had the director position open to open up the Bloomington Exodus office. And I was like, perfect. And that's how I got that position.
I'm realizing we should probably have you explain what Exodus is.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, so Exodus is an independent, areligious, apolitical nonprofit. And what we do, and there are about, pre-January 20th, there probably were about 300 of us across the country. And what we do is
agencies?
Yeah, of agencies like us. We're not all necessarily connected, but we're doing similar work. And what we do is we subcontract up to, again, this is all pre-January 20th, we subcontract up to the federal government, the State Department, to welcome refugees coming to the United States. And we have to be very specific about that term in this work, because the term is used widely for a lot of populations, and rightfully so. But that term is actually very specific, internationally and national. So internationally, to be a refugee, you're fleeing persecution based off of nationality, political affiliation, a particular social group, religion, and you are outside your home country. You have had to flee your country. People flee in different ways, scary ways, violent ways, and they can't return because it could mean death for them, right? They've been persecuted. They're not allowed to go back to their home country. And there's, I think, close to 40 million refugees now with that status around the world. And they do interview and sort of prove that status, right, with the United Nations. So you just don't get handed it, right? You sort of prove that you're not affiliated with a terrorist group or anything like that. No, I cannot go back to my home country.
Right. This isn't like a situation where like the UN or whatever is kind of just studying broadly and making sort of a statement like based on sociological studies, we can kind of tell that there's about this many people. It's an actual recognized status, official status.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, and they're residing in refugee camps or they're residing in urban settings, but they've registered with the UN so they can get, certain benefits of being a refugee. And those are very difficult ways to live, and the average length of stay in a refugee camp, right? And a refugee camp is supposed to be temporary in nature, okay, is 17 years. That's the average stay for a refugee. So we welcome people who were born and raised in refugee camps. And these are not places that you travel to for a vacation, right? These are places that are underfunded. I definitely have welcomed people who we would go grocery shopping for the first time. And they're like, man, I'm just excited to eat as much food as I want. Because then in a refugee camp, you're allotted a certain amount of food or you get a certain amount of money. There's definitely lack of education opportunities, underfunded medical care. They're dangerous. I've, heard a lot of stories of people who have been tortured in camps. Gender-based violence can be high in camps. So these are dangerous places to be and difficult places to live because what it is, right, they're a refugee in that country. They're not a citizen and they're not a permanent resident. So they don't necessarily get to enjoy freedom of movement or whatever sort of freedoms and things that citizens can have. So like we said, that's about 40 million people that are living that way. And then, so from that number, right, we think, what are the options for this population? What are we doing with 40 million people? What are 40 million people doing? And we have three things that is an option. And one is go back home, right? And I would argue most people would probably want to go home to their home country. They have land, property, family, community, culture, food, all of these things that we love about our homes. But conflict doesn't resolve itself quickly or without issues. So a lot of people just can't go back. So Burma is a really good example of that. They had elected a Democratic president, and I think there might have even been talks of maybe we don't need to resettle Burmese, right? Because things are getting better and people may be able to go back. But then another military coup happened and people were being persecuted again. And so of course we're still welcoming Burmese refugees here. And so when we look at places like Ukraine or Afghanistan, people think, oh, well, in 2 years, you'd be able to go back home to your home country. And we are, 2 years out from that war. And some people are definitely not able to go back. So that's the one option. The second option is maybe they patriate, become citizens in the country they fled to. So like if you fled to Jordan, maybe Jordan gives you a pathway to citizenship, and then you could sort of enjoy what it means to be a citizen in Jordan and have your life there. But when you look at a country like Lebanon, and these might be some outdated numbers, but it's a country of about 5 to 6 million people, has conflict of its own, I think, some things that have even recently boiled up. And they had about maybe 1.5 to 2 million Syrian refugees. So what does it look like to have, that large of a number become citizenship? Like, do you have the resource, the infrastructure for that? In addition to, there's a lot of discrimination in countries that people flee to. And I think, Pakistan was kicking Afghans out. Iran was kicking Afghans out. So that's not always an option either. And then we have this third option, that they go to a third country, a country that says, hey, we'll welcome refugees, and you get a pathway to citizenship. You get to make this country your home. And again, pre-January 20th, there were about 30 countries that do that. The U.S., Australia, European countries. And the U.S. historically has welcomed the largest number of refugees in the world. We've welcomed over 3 million since we started this program in 1980. And to put perspective on the number of refugees coming here, that is a fraction of a percent of refugees that we're talking about that get this opportunity. So that 40 million, just a fraction of 1%, get this opportunity to go to a country and really feel like they can establish a life for themselves. And again, to be very clear about refugees, they're not fleeing for economic reasons, right? They're not coming to a country to have a better life. and I have no qualms about people doing that.
Right.
Like, I think that's great, and I think that should also be protected in international issues that we have.
The standard immigrant story that we hear.
That's not the case. Refugees are coming to live, right? We've definitely welcomed families who children would have died in camps because they didn't have the medical care, or they were targeted for their race, their gender, their queer identity.
Like to live in the sense of to not die.
Exactly. Yeah. Let's be very clear. Like to be alive. Yeah. That is, and to take it a step further, right, when I said we have to be specific about that term refugee, so we talked about that international status, but it's also a U.S. status. So to get here as a refugee, you have to go through years and years of background checks. You go through every major federal agency here. If you want to come to America, that is the hardest way to get to America, is as a refugee. That process takes, minimum 1 to 2 years, and we've seen it take over 10 years to get here. And so they have what's called, refugee status here in the United States. It's a protected status here. It's, governed by law. They have a pathway to citizenship. And so, that was a long answer to the question about, what is a refugee? And so we're the agency that when they sort of get through all the processing and the checks, and they're like, okay, great, you can come to the U.S. and start your life over, they get sort of assigned to different areas. Maybe they have family there, maybe they don't, based off capacity of local areas. And so they get assigned to an agency like ours. And we are at the airport picking them up, taking them to their homes, setting up their homes, getting kids in school, getting medical care, getting access to benefits, helping people get jobs. And then, in a short amount of time, families are self-sufficient.
So back to Bloomington.
Yeah.
Or what would be happening in Bloomington. So you applied for the job and got the job to be the director of the Bloomington office before it existed.
And it actually goes back a little bit further. And it was when I was working in Indianapolis, and I was a manager, not a director, so I wasn't in the know at the time. But no, we were actually working to open up a sub office back in 2015, 2016. I think even for a couple years at that time, the community was like, we want to do this. And I'm not from Bloomington. This is my first time living in Bloomington, and that makes so much sense now that I'm here, that this community is like, give us a resettlement agency, because people's hearts are really big here and they really care. And so they were working on that, having town halls, getting the mayor's office to sign on, building up local capacity. And then 2015, our governor at the time, Pence, and along with 30 other governors, halts Syrian resettlement. Says, hey, we're not going to let Syrians come to our state because of terrorism. Very racist, very lacking facts in making that kind of choice. It was a lot of the rhetoric at the time. And the Syrian war had broken out just a few years earlier. And so that was sort of, how do I put it? It was a sign of the times. It was like the beginning of what we were about to experience under a Trump administration is what it was. And so that sort of started to put halt on setting up the office. And we actually at that time partnered with the ACLU, sued the governor for doing that and got the injunction and won it. And I just like to plug that because I think that's how far Exodus goes, is like we will fight for the rights of our clients to every extent possible. But then Trump became president and systematically reduced this program every single year he was in office. So offices were closing. There was a reduction in staff, a reduction in how we were operating in Indianapolis. So there was no opportunity or ability to open up a sub-office, right? So that got put on hold. Fast forward, Biden becomes president, opening up this program, building up this program again, and the Afghan evacuation happens in, what was that, August of 2021?
Right. So my understanding is that the plan was to open up the office in Bloomington and really start resettling people in the spring of 2022.
So I think, and again, I wasn't around. I was out in New Mexico working as a therapist in a hospital. So Afghan evacuation happens like around, was that summer of 2021. And so then now there's this sort of push to like get more agencies because they're funneling these Afghan evacuees through the resettlement program. And so then we get that approval from the State Department in October 2021 to open up an office. And then there's sort of this naivete of like, yeah, we'll take 6 months, we'll hire somebody, we'll get staff going, we'll find an office, the normal things that people do to open up a nonprofit. But then in November, they get a call that are like, yep, you've got some of your first Afghans coming to Bloomington in Indianapolis. And they're like, what now? And again, I'm still not on the scene. I'm still living my life in New Mexico. So the Indy office is already experiencing an influx of Afghans. And to put perspective on that, in that fiscal year before Afghans were being resettled, the Indianapolis office welcomed about 120 people through the year. And then in like 1 month in November, they welcomed 120 people. So you take your workload, you multiply that by 12. Right. That is what agencies were experiencing across the nation.
Wow.
And it was hard, but it was worth it, right? Because we got like almost 100,000 Afghans here and safe, which is great.
Here in the U.S. or here in the state?
In the U.S.
Uh-huh.
The state, no. Wow, we would be, I don't know if I'd be on 2 feet if that was the case. No, in the U.S.
Okay.
And we've still been welcoming Afghans, but it was again that initial evacuation.
Right, okay.
And so that's when they're like, okay, we got to speed this process up. And then, December, I was like, hey, I'm interested in moving to Bloomington. Heard you got a job. They're like, and I'm interviewing and it's going well. And I'm also thinking, oh, this might take a couple months. Maybe I could get a month, finish my time in New Mexico. I got to move. I got to find housing. I don't know if you guys know this. It's housing issues in Bloomington.
Oh, interesting.
I'm literally, right? This is, we could talk more in another podcast about housing here. And I'm literally, FYI, living in an RV trailer in New Mexico. I was living that life. It was very fun. And my husband's out there teaching. And they're like, no, we need you as soon as you can get here. And I was like, they're like, no, seriously, like as soon. And I was like, okay, still did not have the full scope of like what was going on. So my partner is actually going to stay in New Mexico, finish out his teaching contract for the next 6 months. And I get in a truck and I move to Bloomington and do not have an apartment.
Yeah.
So I'm living.
This is in December?
This is in, so like January, the first week of January.
First week of January 2022.
Yeah. And my first day was like January 10th, meet with my CEO who, I've worked with before. And he's giving me the lay of the land, right? He's like, yeah, so we've got probably like 20, 30 Afghans who are here already. I'm going to say there were probably over 100 volunteers helping families because that's how they did it. They sort of worked with faith organizations and groups in the city to help these families that were arriving where we didn't have staff and capacity to like fully serve them. So you had all these, which was fantastic, right? And amazing working with families, but also a little bit in a vacuum of like, how am I supposed to do this every day? Like what's going on? And there was no physical office space and no staff either. So I definitely walked into like if anyone social services out there, 20 to 30 people on your caseload is a full caseload. That's a full-time job. And that was sort of the beginning, the very, very beginning of getting like an official office built out here. Yeah, and I was in that
Okay.
hotel for so living and operating the agency out of a hotel. Yeah.
Yeah, so tell me about that.
Yeah. Not ideal.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Actually, it wasn't as bad. It was just sort of funny, right? Like I remember I partnered with a group on campus that made these lovely Valentine's Day welcome gifts for families. And they're like, where can I drop them off in your office? I was like, actually go to Candlewood Hotel and meet me in the lobby and we'll sort of truck it up to my hotel room. And they're like, okay. So yeah, meeting people at a hotel was weird. And yeah, so...
Right, because the hotel room was your living space and your office.
Yes, yeah. So it was a lot of in the community work, not meeting with clients in my hotel room. Definitely avoided that.
That's probably good.
Yeah. And it was still sort of like you're kind of like pants on fire. Let's make sure our new Afghan neighbors have everything they need, right? Have they seen the doctor? Are our kids in school? And thankfully, our partners, our faith partners that were working with families had done a really great job of like meeting the needs of our clients and making sure they had everything they needed. So that was fabulous. And
were they already in Bloomington?
Yeah. So like First United Methodist Church is a church that we've worked with extensively, was one of the churches that stepped up and welcomed one of the first Afghan families that were here. And so, yeah, it's churches here, Beth Shalom. The mosque was doing a lot of support for our Muslim community. There was, a ton of support already here. It just wasn't organized or within it's a government program. So there's about 600 documents that you have to fill out for everything you do, and you have to track everything a certain way. That's where I sort of had to come and be like, okay, we have to sort of formalize some of the things we're doing, make sure we're tracking the services that we're doing, in addition to hiring some staff and training those staff to do the work.
Right.
So it was a lot of overlapping work at the time.
Yeah. And when you had to get things sent to you, they would go to the post office?
Yeah. So we opened up, we didn't have a P.O. box at first. Right. We're just sort of like trying every day, like, okay, who needs food? Who needs a job? And then it's like, oh yeah, you have an office and you're going to get mail. And I don't want to drive to Indianapolis to pick up things that I need. So initially there's another Indianapolis staff member that lives here in Bloomington. He works remotely, actually. Okay. So he was my mailbox first.
Right.
So I just drive over to Matt's house. We're like, hey, Matt. He's like, I got your printer. I was like, thanks, Matt. Or here's your mail. And then I opened up a P.O. box for our office. And so by this point, I was into my own apartment, but I'm living in a very small, like, studio apartment by myself. And so it was basically just the office. And I remember at one point, you're driving families around, you need car seats. That's a basic part of having an office. So I ordered all these car seats. And I remember the post office had to call me. It was like, hey, you need to pick up your stuff because we don't have room for our mail. And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. Because
it was like 20 car seats?
Yeah. And so, and I have
big boxes.
Those are huge boxes. And so I have like a little like truck, 2-passenger truck, and I go and and it's just me, picking up all these boxes and carrying them out, stacking the truck, ratcheting my truck to make sure those boxes don't cause an accident.
How high was the stack?
It was, it was it was like up to the top of the truck.
Yeah, right.
But then the super fun part was driving it back to my apartment that was on a third floor with no elevator. and I was in really good shape at the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, so my front room was just all car seats and then paperwork and trying to get stuff ready for the office in the early days.
So people were already here. Were there more people arriving too?
Yes. No, people are still coming. Yeah. We did get a little bit of a break, I think. But then in April, people started arriving again.
And what's that like?
Yeah. So they come to Indianapolis. And so we're driving to Indy to welcome people. And in a fun way, our families are coming in at like 10 p.m., 11 p.m., midnight. And I was like, I really wish I had some ability to like change that because that's a late night for us, right? We got to work all day and then we're going to go. And at this point, I started like just hiring staff. So there started to be a few of us at least that could do this. But in the beginning, it was me handling all those pickups along with the volunteers. So I'd like meet these volunteers. I was like, hey, you come help me with a pickup? And they're like, yeah, of course. I was like, it's at 11 p.m. in Indy. And they're like, okay. And then we're like hanging out at 11 and the flights get delayed and things happen. And I remember one time we were at the airport till 2 a.m. Picking up a family, and shout out again to First United Methodist Church. They did one of those pickups and they were just pleasant as can be that entire time. And some of them had to work in the morning. And I was like, I'm so sorry, but I desperately need your van to welcome this family. Because again, if it's just me, I had my 2-person truck. I couldn't really drive people to and from Indianapolis. So yeah, we get sort of handed those arrival dates, and we need to be there, of course. And it's also one of the most fun parts of the job, is to be there welcoming families. Even though it's midnight and they're exhausted, it's still a very, very joyful time. But then the other funny part is and we're going to Bloomington, and they're just like, some people are like, what's Bloomington? I was like, it's a great question, because we're not going to stay in Indianapolis, which is a more common city to hear, and we're going to be in the car for an hour. Right. And then at the time, too, we were new, and we didn't have relationships with housing partners at that point. I was literally calling probably 50 to 100 landlords a week, trying to find people that could house refugees, because they don't have their Social Security yet. They don't have a credit history. So having to explain the system, having to explain hey, we're going to pay for rent in the beginning, just didn't know us. So a lot of people went into hotels at the time, which is not ideal for anybody. Right. And especially people who are, trying to feel like this is their home and they're on solid ground. Yeah. Another shout out, Homewood Suites is such a fantastic hotel that has hosted our clients. Like family, literally. They're like their family to us, and they treat our clients so great there. And we relied on them very heavily in that first year as we were trying to get housing partners. A lot of that is different now. We have a lot of great partners now, housing partners where we could, they don't have to spend so much time in a hotel, and we can get them in an apartment right away. Yeah, now I don't remember the question, but yeah, that was sort of what we were doing in the beginning.
Can you tell me a little bit more? Walk me through what it's like for a refugee, maybe an individual or a family, to arrive and start to get settled.
Yeah. So you've flown probably halfway across the world, and maybe you've never even been on a plane before, and maybe you've never even lived in a home with electricity before, and now you're getting put on a plane with your little kids, and you show up in the middle of America, and yeah, and so you get, we welcome you, a couple people there. We always have interpreters. We work with people who speak languages other than English. So we welcome you, and we go to pick up your luggage, and then we sort of drive you. And even before people come, we are inspecting homes and places for safety hazards. We're making sure it has everything people need in the home, and that they're safe for people to be in. And so hopefully you get to walk into your apartment, and you get to, it's sparse, but you have everything that you need. Your cabinets are full of food. There's some toys, hopefully, for your kids. You have your couch, your beds, and and then the people that you arrive with, right, are going to show you around. Now, we welcome people of so many different backgrounds, but to remember, some people have not lived in homes that a lot of Americans are accustomed to. So we do a home safety orientation the day they arrive. Even if it's 2 a.m. in the morning, we're going to walk you through that apartment and make sure you understand how to use an oven and a stove. Because if you don't, that can cause a fire. It can be scary. Right. And explaining refrigerators. Some people have never used refrigerators before. How to turn on and off the lights. How to open and close the door. We make sure people understand how to lock their doors and open it. Not a lot of people are always used to that. Here's your phone. We definitely work with people who've never had to use their own phone, usually older people, making sure they understand what 911 is, right? Because it's a very important number to have. And there is a warm meal for you when you arrive.
That's great.
Yeah, so a culturally appropriate meal.
That's also important.
Shout out to Samira's, who we've bought a lot of food from. And so it might be 3 a.m., but there's food for your family, and you can do what you need. And then we do leave you to sleep for a little bit, and then we are going to come back in the morning and check on you.
Come back and be knocking.
Yeah, and we're going to come back. Someone's going to check in on you and make sure you have everything that you need right now, right? Like, it's January in Indiana, and you may have come from Tanzania.
Yeah.
So, we made sure you had a coat the night before, but is there enough warm clothes for your family right now? Is there enough food for your family? Do you have enough medication that you need, right? Is anyone having any medical issues that we're worried about right now? And we're starting to explain, like, hey, what the next 3 months is going to look like. And then a couple days after that, you're going to meet with your caseworker, who's going to walk you through the next few months of your life and explains, like, this is what a Social Security card is. This is what a food stamp card is. We're going to enroll your kid in school. You're going to meet with a doctor in the next few weeks, hopefully, be seen by a doctor. You're going to participate in English classes. Here's, a number of ways to get involved in English classes here in Bloomington. And Exodus, actually, our Indianapolis office, offers all online classes. We actually developed, our director over there of English of education has developed the curriculum for refugees in Indiana. So, that curriculum is for our clients.
Oh, that's so
interesting.
And
so they can access that like day one to start learning more English. But of course, some clients come fluent in English. And then talk about, in a few months, you're going to have to get a job, right? And start working, paying the bills. But you'll be able to attend cultural orientation classes. It's like 2 to 4 days of classes covering everything about living in the United States, which if you are born and raised in the U.S., like, just take a moment and think about, like, what happens when that tornado siren goes off, right? Like, lots of people don't know what that is. And, like, what do you do if there's a tornado? And we have had that issue here in Bloomington. Time in the U.S. so very different from other areas of the world, right? Like, I remember when I lived in West Africa, and I'd be like, okay, everybody, we're going to meet at 5 o'clock. And our meetings wouldn't get started till 10 p.m. at night. And that's just the way it was, It's so very different from how time works here. And, like, if you're going to sort of...
Pretty punctual here.
Yeah, survive the systems here, you have to show up on time.
Right.
To, like, this is what school's going to look like for your kid, So many things. Or the medical system. Right? The insurance, right? Like why? Like, why do we have this complicated medical system?
Good question.
Yeah, and I have to tell people, like, this is a confusing system, and I'm sorry, but explaining, like, how you're going to pay for medical stuff, right? The insurance is different from medical care, and the different types of medical care, right? Like, you just don't go to the ER. You have to schedule appointments, PCP, urgent care.
And so this is unfolding over the course of the next couple months?
Pretty much, yeah. Okay. So they're sort of partaking in all these services the next couple months. Sort of in the beginning, it's like education, right? And then we start moving towards applying for jobs for the people who are able to work, getting kids in school, and medical care. Medical care is a really big one because a lot of people have unchecked or just things that weren't able to be treated very well where they came from. So we often see a lot of complex needs with medical care. Yeah, that needs, like, a lot of long-term support. And some things we're, like, figuring out in the beginning. Like, oh, that's somebody... Like, we have definitely welcomed people who were pregnant, so joyful and great. Definitely something I'd love to know before you came, because I could get you an appointment as soon as possible, for you who's, carrying a child. Sometimes we get surprises like that, and it's like, okay. And then a lot of times people are just not feeling good for so many reasons.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people end up in the ER, not a lot, but some people end up in the ER because they just don't know what's going on, right? It's been so long and we can't get into a doctor because you got to wait 6 weeks to see a doctor.
Right.
So we're helping people, address emergency medical needs during this time. And then, about the 3-4 month mark is when we start really hoping people are getting placed in jobs. Mm-hmm. And then that's a whole process to, if you don't speak English, right?
Yeah, what kinds of jobs do people end up in?
Well, shout out to IU. It is our biggest employer here.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in different departments. Yeah. And I'm going to get them wrong, but like utilities, I think, is one. But like custodian work in different areas.
Facilities.
Yeah, facilities. Thank you.
Yeah.
Facilities. And then dining. I know IU dining was probably one of our first places.
Okay, cool.
And so our employment specialists are job coaches, essentially, and we provide interpretation for the process. But we're sort of guiding people along the way, like, okay, you're going to go in for an interview tomorrow. And when they ask you why they want the job, don't say for money, because Americans don't like to hear that. Because, of course it's strange. For money. Like, yeah.
Right, but it's actually because I love preparing food.
That's exactly it, right? So we're like coaching, right? Like, yes, yeah, I mean, that's why we're all working. But, little things like that can really mess up an opportunity for you. And Goodwill's another one. Restore has been fabulous. I mentioned those three because they've just been absolutely great supporters of refugees working in these places. Because, as you can imagine, there's so many things to learn on the job.
Yeah.
And so they're really flexible and very supportive. I think I remember, who was it? Facilities maybe that had translated 30 pages of information in Kinyarwanda, which, one, people listening to this probably have never heard that language before.
I have not.
Yeah. It's a language that Congolese speak.
Okay.
And it's not a very common language, but, they took that time and made sure that was translated so people could be successful in their job.
So cool.
Yeah. We're just so grateful for our employer partners. And, yeah, so we provide a lot of support in the beginning, and people sort of figure out their groove, and then the next piece is okay, now I gotta pay bills, right? Now I gotta pay rent, and that's a scary and difficult time for a lot of people. And when I say people, I mean all of us, right? At the end of the month, they're like,
it's
okay,
true.
how am I stretching this? Because, especially if you don't speak English, you're not getting the highest wages here.
Yeah.
And even if you do, we welcome people with professional backgrounds, master's degrees. Yeah. And, IU actually ends up working with some of those people who are working to continue their degrees or accredit their degrees, but they're not going to jump into a high wage job in their field because they're new here, and they really here in the U.S. you really have to prove yourself before people start hiring you. They need to know that you're committed and loyal. And so that's hard for people with those backgrounds because you're like, I've applied to 30 jobs. What's going on? It's I'm really sorry, but I think you're going to have to go work at IU Dining, because you have to show that you're willing to do anything first. So then through that process, people start learning. And there's a lot of financial education that we provide and resources that we connect with families who are probably going to struggle a little more. If they have a big family or single parents, definitely I'd say things are just really hard for single parents as a rule here in the United States. And then people are independent. They're taking care of themselves and they're doing, living their life here.
Yeah.
And it's great to see.
Okay, so part of what I'm interested in is to hear actually about the next phase, which is to say, part of what I'm interested in thinking about on my show in general is not just the logistics of how we get by, but also how we make life more full. Yeah. And so to hear about what is community like,
I'm very excited to answer this question. And it's something that I learned very quickly. So I've worked with international populations for my whole career. And when I started the office here, not only was I wow, this is really hard doing what we're doing with nothing, but I was this is so hard for our first clients because they don't have established refugee communities. So in Indianapolis, you've got 20, 30,000 strong Burmese on the south side, Greenwood. I mean, flourishing community,
yes,
right?
Absolutely.
It's beautiful. You also have a flourishing Congolese community, Syrian community. So when we welcome Congolese and Syrians and Burmese, they've got hundreds of people in their community that's hey, this is what life is like in America. Hey, they didn't tell you how to take the bus to this place. Let me help you take the bus. Or people who have cars and can drive you around.
Right.
We literally welcomed, the first Syrian refugee here, the first Congolese refugee here. And there are, the Afghans we welcome. There is a small Afghan community here, but I've yet to encounter a small Congolese community. If you're there, give me a call. But I really felt for our clients because that is scary.
It seems like it would be lonely.
Yeah,
too.
Exactly. The isolation was something I feared a lot for people. And then it was also, on the other side, it was hard for us because the needs were a lot higher.
Right.
This is not putting Indianapolis down by any means. Anyone hear this? This is not what I'm doing. But the case management needs were higher for us. Working with 10 people here was more work because they didn't have anyone to rely on. We had to help figure them out transportation for everything because they didn't have anyone to show them that. And so this was a concern that I had. And after I got through my housing, the thing that kept me up a lot at night was, am I going to be able to place people in homes? Once I sort of got over that worry, my new worry is are people going to feel like this is their community? Because I will tell you, we welcome people and they left. Some families left because they're like, there's no Somalis here. Why would I be here?
Yeah.
And you know, and that's great. I think it's so important for people to feel good where they're at. And so, of course, we want to keep people here, but also freedom of movement. And you know, be in the place that you're going to thrive. And so, but in such a short amount of time, I'm telling you, in like 6 months, we started to see that community develop. And I'm sure it's a big word and it means a lot of things.
Sure.
Just some examples of what I saw. We had some people placed in one housing apartment sort of area, and people of all different backgrounds were going there. Right.
This is part of my question.
Yeah.
What I was curious about was whether it's like communities like within a group from one place or across the refugee experience.
Yeah. Well, and let me explain this. Like in Indianapolis, and I'm not sure if it works this way in other areas across the country, but once you have your Burmese community, you find apartments in the Burmese community, right? So,
makes sense.
So it's like south side for Burmese, north side for Congolese, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But here, because housing has been so bad, you know, we weren't able to sort of be able to do that. We weren't able to be like, okay, we're going to place the Syrians in this area and we're going to place the Congolese here. It was like, oh, you got an apartment that's affordable? Great, here's this family, which is not ideal, but we were sort of forced into that. So, but one apartment, right? I found one apartment complex that would work with us. So then everyone was going there for a time.
Right.
So we had everyone, you know, Syrians, Congolese, Afghans were there. And I started to hear stories of how like some of the first Syrians were showing, you know, some of the Congolese, like where to find the mailbox and like how to look at the mail or even help reading the mail. So there was some of that intercultural community that was developing there. But then definitely within populations, that community was growing really fast. The Congolese community is such a great example of that. And in part to what First United Methodist Church has done. So First United Methodist Church had helped sponsor our first Congolese family that we welcomed and just created a very welcoming space for that church. And they were Christian. And so they started attending that church, right? Like, great. And then as it works in a lot of communities, right? More Congolese come and it's like, okay, great, come to church with us, right?
Sure,
like we're all going over here.
Yeah.
And then they hosted a good friend of mine now, Pastor John, who speaks Swahili and is from Africa. So now all of the Congolese are like, oh, someone who speaks our language, right? And so they started to do like multilingual services.
Oh, yeah. Amazing.
Yeah. So
and
now,
was he also a refugee or?
No. This was just through the church system.
Oh, I see.
Right. He comes as
cool.
a pastor. Sorry, I didn't make that clear. Yeah. And I didn't know this, but it sounded like they actually, behind the scenes, tried to get someone like John to come because they knew this community was growing and they knew that community didn't really have anyone else, you know? And so now that congregation has got to be 50, 60 strong. They have it as an East African ministry now, like as a line item. And so, and they host USA 101 classes once a month. We've done English classes over there. I always, if you want to talk to the Congolese, you go to First United. And the thing I want to point out, too, it's not that all the Congolese were like Methodist Christians, right?
Sure.
Some of them weren't even Christian, and they go to FUMC. It's just that the Congolese and the church helped to host this community and they came together and are supporting each other. Now people have cars that arrived a couple years ago and are helping people drive around and get to appointments. So that was amazing. It was nothing I ever would have thought have happened in this amount of time. And then I remember some of our first Syrian families, pretty quickly, 6 months in, we'd welcome a new Syrian family and they were like, hey, come on over. We're going to feed you. We're going to show you how to use the bus. We're going to show you where to go grocery shopping. So those communities started really quickly. And it really is because of the resilience and the strengths of refugee communities, like period. We have so much as people born and living in the United States to learn from refugees about what it means to come together as a community, to support each other, to love each other, to support each other's values. And we see that so quickly, opening up their doors to strangers, but they're like, people need help. So come into my home, I will help you. And so I had just one of the biggest lessons of my life, seeing those communities develop in such a short amount of time. And I'm hoping Bloomington will be my community with some time, right? Like came to Bloomington for this reason, but I'm just very much feeling a part of this community. And I'm just really proud that part of our community are these other communities that are developing, and we're developing together.
Okay, we're going to take another break. Before we do, let's do a quick recap. At this point in the story, Erin has gotten a physical office space for Exodus. She's got a full staff, about 10 people.
I was super proud of everything that we had built and like the services we were able to provide. It really felt like we were adequately staffed for welcoming about 150 refugees to 200 every year.
And refugees have gotten established here in Bloomington. They're building community. Neighbors from different countries are helping each other. There's a Congolese gospel choir.
You're like crying and like dancing, right, at the same time because it's so beautiful.
And then, in January, Trump comes back into office. When we come back, we'll hear from Erin what's happened since.
Once Trump took office on January 20th, immediately signed an executive order banning the entire refugee program under the guise of, I will do my best here to not be sarcastic, under the guise of they were going to, evaluate the program for safety and do like a 90-day review, right? And I mentioned before, this is the safest way for anyone to get here. There are not safety concerns with this program. That is pure rhetoric and fear-mongering to say something like that about this program. So they shut it down immediately, and they've even terminated the contracts with the 10 national agencies, which is unprecedented. Yeah, that's sort of a newer one. And they shut down overseas processing. We literally had families booked to travel. People were booked to travel, canceled all of those flights. And we have stories of, there was a woman who came sometimes in this refugee processing. The families that we have don't get processed together. And right, that makes sense, right? Because if you sort of come in, if you start the application, maybe you're 20 when you I am a refugee, I'm going to apply to come to the U.S. 5 years later, you married, you had a kid. This is normal. This is what people do, right?
Yeah, right.
And so sometimes you're not always processed as a family or together. And so this was that example. We have a couple examples of families who came and were waiting for their spouses to come or their children to come, and those flights were canceled, which is just heartbreaking. And I also want to be really clear, when we are not opening up this pathway to people in need, people will die. In this one example, there's a man in a country he fled to. They're targeting him, and he has to probably go under the radar and sort of disappear, as we say, so that he won't be targeted. And then that very well could mean his life. So that's...
And I think you said that's the husband of someone.
That's the husband. Yeah, a husband of a wife who was waiting for him to arrive, that we're just not sure. He's not safe where he's at right now. And we know that for a lot of people are just not safe. And I didn't mention this before, but something I'm very proud of in our history here is our refugee program focuses on the most vulnerable people. Not all refugee programs do that.
You mean ours in the U.S.?
Yes, in the United States. So women and children, people of identities that are being targeted, medical complexity and needs. And so it's difficult, right? Because, it's hard to live in America when you have extra needs.
Yeah.
But we make sure to bring those people in. And I know that saves lives every day, right? We are doing that as a country, but we've shut that down. And so pretty quickly, our national agency, Church World Service, and another one, plus about 9 other refugees across the country, filed a lawsuit against Trump and his administration for shutting it down. And a judge quickly put an injunction on that and ordered Trump and the administration to start processing again. And I think as we're seeing in other areas of these lawsuits, Trump and the administration is ignoring these orders. We've seen a little bit of movement, a couple pieces. So a weird thing that happened was refugees who are approved to come were allowed to book their own travel and come. So normally that's all done through the system. We book the flights, put you on the flight, come in. And that's another fun thing I didn't mention earlier. Refugees actually, in classic American fashion, they come in debt because their national agencies book the flights, right, and pay for the flights, and then refugees have to pay it back. Okay.
Welcome to America.
Yeah, welcome to America. Here's $10,000 of debt. And so that's a really good fact for people who sort of believe that that this is a drain on our system. This program's a drain on our system. Refugees pay that back, and to also fight that fact, there was a study conducted over a 15 period of time to challenge and see okay, is there more financially being put into this refugee program than we get back, like with taxes and input in our economy. Guess what? It's like $128 billion surplus on top of the money that we put into this program.
That gets created into the economy as a result of this program.
Because of refugees. And that number's, probably even bigger for other immigrants in different statuses. Of course, I'm here today to talk about refugees only. So like it is financially responsible to welcome refugees because they contribute so much financially to our economy. But all that aside, Trump really isn't abiding by the orders. Another judge comes in, as they do in the Ninth Circuit, and said, no, actually, we're going to have the ban. We're putting the ban in place, but anyone who's been approved to come needs to come. So, and that's about 100,000 people that have been approved by USCIS, by all those security systems to come to the U.S. And we continue to see no movement on that from the Trump administration. So we're sort of, as we are with a lot of other things going on at the national level, sort of waiting to be like, where's the accountability here, right? Because they're not abiding by court orders right now. So meanwhile, what does that look like, right? Like, a lot of furloughs on the national level, and we'll probably see, smaller agencies across the country have to shutter their doors.
And is that happening for the Bloomington office as well?
No. So Exodus, we are thankfully, right, that sub-office of Indianapolis who's been around for 40 years. And we have a fantastic leadership team up there who we have lived through a version of this before. When Trump was first elected, he came back with a vengeance, I'll tell you that, because initially he never actually shut down the program. He just kept sort of lowering the numbers and dismantling certain parts of the system. Okay. It's kind of convoluted, right? But like instead of
lowering the numbers of refugees who could come in.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. And then but really what he did was, if we said, oh, we're going to look back 5 years on the security check, he's like, okay, we're going to look back 10 years. So sort of putting in extra barriers in the process that was also a reason why that reduction happened. And really under Biden, we spent these 4 years trying to build up that process. But Trump came in and was like, no, we're done. Like the program is shut, canceled the contracts. Yeah.
Right. So you said that some offices are getting reduced, staff is getting reduced.
So yeah, our office, our leadership had been preparing for Trump 2.0. Okay. So financially preparing, programmatically preparing, and preparing our clients, right? Like our legal team has been working extremely hard on getting, asylum applications processed, green card applications processed, because those are all kind of offer forms of protection for immigrants. I haven't really talked about it here, but there are other types of immigrant statuses that we do serve. All of them are what we would call immigrants of humanitarian concern, people fleeing for their life. But there's sort of nuance in it, and a lot of those are being attacked by Trump. And so our legal team has been working diligently to try and offer as much protection as possible. And we have a more diversified funding stream probably than some other places. We've been around for a long time. We have a good name. We have a great reputation. And I am confident our doors will stay open. But what version of what that looks like, right, is going to change because we're not welcoming people right now. No refugee has come in through our offices since Trump has taken office.
And it seems like that might be the case for a while.
Yes, definitely. And the other thing, I want to mention is that we've welcomed close to 500 refugees here in Bloomington since we opened our office.
In like 3 years.
Yeah.
2 or 3 years.
From over 20 different countries. They speak over 20 different languages. So it's not just, sometimes in the news, pre-Trump, it'd be like, oh, Afghan. So we have Afghan refugees here. And I'll be like, yeah, and Congolese refugees and Somali refugees. So many different types of people are here with so many different skill sets and experiences. And so, but there's still needs in that community. Because the other thing that I think it's hard for people to understand sometimes is like social services in the United States is not really, they're not robust as they are in Europe, right? I think insurance is a classic example of that. But when you look at food stamps and cash assistance, and the state of Indiana, surprise, surprise, is also one of the worst for those kind of public benefits as well. So it's just like hard to live in America and survive. And so people have financial needs, they have case management needs, medical care needs. We provide mental health services for people. Surprise, surprise, with a lot of the things that are going on at national level are increasing mental health issues among people. So we're committed, and the legal processes that people are allowed to partake in, we're still offering those. So like we are committed to serving people who are here and the needs that they have. And that's why we're not going away, even though they're shuttering the doors to welcoming new people.
And so what is the immediate future of what the office will look like or what the work looks like.
It's, an unfortunate, reduction in workforce that we've seen across the country. It looks like shifting sort of day-to-day things that we're doing. So, if you're welcoming people, there's sort of this rush in the first 3 months to do all those things that I talked about.
Right.
But now when you have people who've been here a bit longer, it's a lot of medical needs, right?
Okay.
Oh, you've got sort of this complicated back issue, right? You've got to meet with like 3 different specialists. You got to go, if you're a kid, we got to drive you up to Riley. So helping out with a lot of that. Maintaining benefits, maintaining your food stamps. I mean, anyone out there who is on public benefits, that's not an easy process, right? The system is sort of designed to fail. So if you missed this one thing you were supposed to sign, they'll sort of take away your food stamps immediately, and you've got 3 kids to feed. So, people come in and we help fix that issue right away, so that you can continue to feed your family. Or having health insurance is another thing that is challenging for a lot of people. They lose health insurance, so they need help getting back on. And like I said, the mental health needs of people need to be met. And yeah, so it just looks like looking at sort of longer term needs. Now we're looking at, what are extended housing options for people to get into more affordable housing in Bloomington. So those are the things we're focusing on right now.
How are things feeling in the office?
Well, in our office, I just have the best team. If you ever get the chance to work with anyone in the office, they are fabulous, amazing, beautiful people. And these are people that know how to meet needs. They know how to address, if somebody comes in, lose the food stamps, have a medical need, they know how to address it right away. And they work really hard. Before, when Trump was elected to when he was inaugurated, the national resettlement system worked to get as many refugees as possible because we knew it was coming, right? So we had to sit down and be like, how many can we take? Because it's hard. This is hard work to help people with every single aspect of their life. And we took on more people than would be normal for us. And we did across the country. And we had some of the highest numbers we've ever welcomed in December or something like that in a history of the refugee program. And I firmly believe that we saved lives by doing that. And the team, it was hard, but they did it, and they always come together. There's just really good morale on the team despite these things. But saying, goodbye to staff that we've worked with is really hard. And I think then there's just fear of fear for our clients, right? What living in a country that is sort of nationally attacking, right, immigrants and among many other populations is horrible, right? Because the whole reason we do this work is because we want to be that happy neighbor that's you are welcomed here. This is your home now, and we are neighbors, and our kids will go to school together, and we will work together, and we are better for having each other in our lives, right? But then you're sort of hearing every day an attack on that just because you came from this country or just because you have this skin color or this queer identity. So I think there's just a heartbreak on our team. I think it's just a lot of heartbreak, but their hearts are so in the work that it is a privilege to work with them and to do this work despite the challenges that we're seeing.
And how are people here who aren't working in the office, but you're working with, the refugees themselves who have settled?
Yeah.
How are people doing?
How are they doing? So, there's more fear and there's more concern about, when this happens, does it mean me, right? Or is my kid going to be taken from school? Because I'm hearing that ICE can show up at a school now. And so we're doing a lot of education about these policies that are coming out, what does affect you? And then we're doing a lot of Know Your Rights campaigning. So we're helping people, explaining what documentation to have, what to do if ICE shows up. We've done a lot of education about that. If ICE shows up at your door, here's how you respond. Here's what a real warrant looks like. And so there's also this other thing that, again, I was surprised and learned from clients, because another heartbreaking thing we're having to tell people is, we have fathers who are separated from their wives and children. We have single moms here who their husbands are still in the camp. If you have a family, and just take a second and think, what would it mean? And I might cry saying it, but what would it mean to be separated from your children? And so, I have to tell them, there's no processing happening. We're not going to see your family for the next 4 years at a minimum. And it just breaks my heart. And I've been surprised at people sort of taking a breath and being like, okay, all right, this is just another, sort of thing that's bad right now, but, we're going to get Trump out of the office and we're going to get a new president and it's going to be better. And so there's some resolve there too, because remembering that refugees have experienced probably the worst that the world has to offer. And so they've survived, unfortunately, far worse.
Right.
And so they're tough, right?
Yeah.
Tougher than me. But there's just, I just think heartbreak is the term right now. There's just so much heartbreak, right? Like, what's going on?
Yeah. I feel like it feels like the right place to end.
Good.
Because that's just where we are right now.
All right.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
And that's our show. You can learn more about Exodus Refugee at exodusrefugee.org. We've got your quick moment of slow radio coming up, but first, the credits. Interstates is produced and edited by me, Alex Chambers. Our associate producer is Dom Hyab. Our master of social media is Jillian Blackburn. We get support from Eobon Binder, Luann Johnson, Sam Schemenauer, Peyton Whaley, and Kate Young. Our executive producer is Eric Bolstridge. Our theme song is by Amy Olsner and Justin Vollmer. We have additional music from the artists at Universal Production Music. All right, time for that found sound. That was neither a long time ago nor far, far away. It was the alcohol bath for the resin printers at the IU Eskenazi School's fabrication lab. Thanks to Jesse Kagi for making that music. Until next time, I'm Alex Chambers. Thanks as always for listening.
Riding back at the top of the hunter's moon.